SpongeBob and Patrick, I think, are officially no longer characters anymore. I'm sorry, but we need to draw some sort of line in the sand here. Characters need to do more than just exist on screen and say words sometimes. But in these two modern SpongeBob episodes, that's just about all SpongeBob and Patrick do. Chapter 1. Kiss of the Nematode. In so many ways, Kiss of the Nematode succeeds as an episode. It's charming, it's creative, it's funny, the story really works. It's about a guy who got turned into a nematode by a witch and gets turned back into a fish when SpongeBob kisses the nematode. But the twist is that the dude preferred being a nematode. Okay, I'm pretty sold on that premise already, but it gets even better because the witch who cursed him renounced being a witch, so the conflict is about trying to get the witch to become a witch again. With this story, we get to see an interaction between two characters and see their respective emotional journeys throughout the episode. Problem is, neither of these characters are SpongeBob. Now, in a vacuum, SpongeBob doesn't have to have a major role in every episode of the show. There's plenty of great episodes where he isn't the focus, but here's the thing. In this episode, SpongeBob is the focus. Dude's in just about every scene, just kind of witnessing the events of the story with just about no impact on it other than being the dude who initially kissed the nematode and turned it back into a guy. Look, if you take a look at Guy Fishman, that's the name of the guy who was a nematode, and the witch, they both go through respective arcs in the episode. For Guy, he finds himself doing some bad deeds to try and make the witch angry, which all backfire when the bad things turned out to have positive outcomes. Common cartoon and sitcom trope, character fails at failing. The witch, on the other hand, has her newfound sense of kindness challenged throughout the episode until the very end when Guy steals her seat on the bus. It was him stealing a seat at the movie theater back when she was a witch that made her curse him in the first place. I think the witch side of the story is a bit more meaningful as it's a cautionary tale about selfishness. The witch is able to keep her cool while Guy screws up all the things she wants to do for other people, but the moment it personally affects her, that's when she gives into her worst urges. Again, SpongeBob doesn't really fit into this at all. The entire story could have been told without him. But I think instead of cutting SpongeBob, he should have just played a more active role in the story. Sure, it makes sense that he would want to follow around Guy and try to help him because he feels bad about removing his nematode curse, but I find character helps another character just because they feel responsible for something to be a pretty weak reason to set someone off on a journey. What is it about the nematode curse that makes SpongeBob want to help Guy, other than it just being because he was responsible for getting him uncursed in the first? The right answer to this question could mean the difference between a character and a prop who looks like the face of your franchise. In order to get a look at a similar story that was done correctly, we can examine Season 1's Mermaidman and Barnacle Boy. Much like Kiss of the Nematode, Mermaidman and Barnacle Boy is about SpongeBob getting involved in someone else's personal life. In the case of Nematode, it's him helping Guy get re-cursed by the witch. In the case of Mermaidman and Barnacle Boy, it's about him helping his favorite elderly heroes out of retirement. The biggest major difference between these two episodes is how much more of a personal attachment SpongeBob has to Mermaidman and Barnacle Boy. The opening sequence of the episode shows him and Patrick watching the show and role-playing as them, which makes us really care when SpongeBob is so adamant about getting them out of retirement. There's even a moment where SpongeBob's perspective is challenged when Patrick laments the advanced age of their heroes, which SpongeBob promptly argues back. So even though the characters who actually change throughout the episode are Mermaidman and Barnacle Boy, with them deciding to come out of retirement, we are still invested in SpongeBob as well. So how can we apply the writing strategies of Mermaidman and Barnacle Boy to Kiss of the Nematode? Well, since one of the main motivators of Guy's desire to turn back into a nematode is because he was engaged to a nematode girl, and as the episode stands, currently SpongeBob does seem invested in that, sure, but I would want him to be more personally invested. And in looking at Mermaidman and Barnacle Boy, we can see that SpongeBob as a character gets really into things like TV shows. So why not start the episode with SpongeBob watching some kind of soap opera where the couple breaks up or something, which shakes up SpongeBob's belief in love, and through helping the guy find his love, he can get over his disappointment at the outcome of the TV show. See how with just one minor change, it makes SpongeBob play so much more of an active role in an episode of a show that is named after him? All in all, SpongeBob in the modern era definitely has a lot of problems as a character. Mainly that he's often portrayed as being too oblivious or too childish. A commenter on one of my previous videos brought up a scene that they think, and I agree, really encapsulates how the show views SpongeBob in the modern era. And it's from the episode Mamageddon, where there's a scene where SpongeBob, Squidward, and Mr. Krabs are playing video games, and SpongeBob's controller isn't plugged in, like he's the 5-year-old little brother mother at a Christmas party. And look, I get the sentiment from the storyboard artist or whoever came up with this little sight gag. I can even picture the conversation. Oh, they're playing video games in the scene? Well, let's have SpongeBob not have the controller plugged in. Won't that be funny? But I think this moment is more of an indication that the people behind the show don't really trust SpongeBob to be a real character anymore. And I'm just saying, a character who is so unself-aware that he could believably think he's playing a video game when his controller isn't plugged in is not a character who can lead a show. While a character who is sure childish enough to get into his cosplay and mess up his neighbor's day, but nevertheless still come off as someone with their own passions, can lead a show. And that's the real reason why an episode like Kiss of the Nematode doesn't use SpongeBob as anything more than a yellow square on screen that talks sometimes. At least the kid who thinks he's playing a video game with the controller unplugged will eventually grow up into someone with a bit more self-awareness. But SpongeBob seems to be aging backwards. Chapter 2. Brainless Brawn. Brainless Brawn is the sister episode to Kiss of the Nematode, which is funny because I think it has some of the same problems that episode had with SpongeBob, but for Patrick. The episode revolves around Larry being envious of Patrick's ability to lift up anything and everything because he's too dumb to notice how heavy it is. A play on the common cartoon trope of characters being able to break the laws of physics if they simply aren't aware of them. It's actually a really clever idea for an episode because it combines the fourth wall breaking acknowledgement of cartoon physics with the actual conflict of the story, being that Larry tries to emulate Patrick's dumbness in order to win a weightlifting competition. It leans into an interesting philosophical question. Can one succeed at doing something if the thing you want to do requires not trying to do the thing because to try to do the thing already makes it impossible to do? Unfortunately, the episode squanders the opportunity to really properly engage with what should have been an excellent idea for an episode, because it resorts to nothing more than a bunch of moments where Patrick does something dumb and then Larry copies him, with Larry getting hurt in the process. So let's get back to the main issue at hand, which is Patrick's lack of characterization. Now, even though Larry is the protagonist of Brainless Brawn, though his characterization isn't great either, it is still very much a Patrick-focused episode. But Patrick doesn't really do anything other than do the dumb things that Larry then emulates. What actually is it about Patrick as a character that makes him the right amount of brainless that he can break the cartoon laws of physics? The answer the episode gives you is that he just kinda is, when there are so many things that the episode could have done to show us why Patrick is this way. The narrative, as it stands, focuses too much on just making fun of Patrick, saying, oh, he's so stupid, and resorting to unfunny lowbrow moments like him eating garbage. And that doesn't really endear us to the character. It just comes off like the writers going, what's something that'll make him look stupid? And then they make Patrick do that with no regard for any sort of deeper characterization. What they should have done with the episode is tie together Patrick's stupidity with his general relaxed personality. Sort of like how in Big Pink Loser he embraces his own lifestyle of doing nothing longer than anybody else after trying so hard to act like SpongeBob the whole episode. The reason Patrick's characterization in Big Pink Loser is meaningful is that he is established to be this lazy bum type character, but he's aware enough of who he is and capable of being insecure about it to the point where it drives the decisions he makes in the episode. And the final outcome of the episode, where Patrick is recognized with an award for who he really is, he stops trying so hard to be someone he's not, thus completing his character arc. Brainless Brawn should have leaned less on Patrick just being the big stupid, and instead focused on Patrick being someone who willingly goes through life with fewer cares. From there, you can still make some reserved jokes about Patrick being stupid. To bring up Big Pink Loser again, something like the "Is this the Krusty Krab?" is a great example of a joke that shows Patrick is dumb but still works with him as a real character. This also would have made the episode more compelling from Larry's POV. Larry as a character is established to be super into his own self-image. I mean, the whole problem he has with winning this competition is that he wants it too much. So in following around Patrick, he should have learned a little bit more about being humble and embracing the competition whether he wins or loses, instead of getting so wrapped up in victory. That way, he would more so deserve that victory because he didn't want it too much. But no, instead they just want Larry to be this one-dimensional meathead archetype who refers to himself in the third person for some reason. By the way, when did this whole Larry refers to himself in the third person thing start? Really bugs me. And the reason that Patrick having good characterization is so important to an episode like this especially is because this is one of those cartoon episodes where a character turns into another character, with Larry looking like Patrick towards the end. This is a common cartoon trope that is an opportunity for the show to examine a specific character's archetype through showing another character becoming that archetype. What makes a trope like this meaningful is how we can see the journey the character, in this case Larry, takes from themselves to the other character, in this case Patrick. But when neither character in this scenario has any sort of meaningful personality, it all ends up falling flat. I think a good episode to compare Brainless Brawn to is Valentine's Day from season 1. I know I brought up Big Pink Loser earlier, but Big Pink Loser is an episode where Patrick is the protagonist. So for the direct comparison, I think Valentine's Day is a better contender because it's an episode that focuses a lot on Patrick as a character, but it's not an episode that is told from Patrick's POV. So the conflict of Valentine's Day revolves around SpongeBob wanting to give Patrick a big chocolate balloon as a present, and after hyping him up, the balloon doesn't arrive on time. The message of the story being that sometimes raised expectations can lead to major disappointment. Patrick is still portrayed as dumb in Valentine's Day, as established by him breaking the Heart Rock present because he thought SpongeBob was inside of it when he was really behind it. Side note, this also foreshadows his later crash out being that because of him misunderstanding the situation, he ends up breaking stuff. What makes Patrick's stupidity in Valentine's Day work is that it's directly tied to his deeper character flaw of not listening, making him more relatable. Like, none of us have ever eaten garbage like Patrick does in Brainless Brawn, and the act of eating garbage isn't even representative of something relatable. It's just a cheap way to portray someone being dumb. So we can't see ourselves in Patrick at all in this moment. But in Valentine's Day, Patrick's feelings are relatable because everyone has felt disappointed at expectations not being met in their own lives. And while most of us have never went around and destroyed a carnival over it, because sometimes we've felt that sort of frustration, Patrick's actions of destroying the carnival can still resonate with us as something representative of how we feel in our own lives. So one last quick thing about the conclusion of Brainless Brawn. Not super related to the main subject of the video, but I felt it was worth commenting on. So at the end of the episode, Larry drops the whole of Bikini Bottom on everyone, and when Larry, SpongeBob, and Patrick pop up, they are suddenly all Patrick, and then Perch Perkins comes in and he's Patrick too. Has anyone else noticed that a lot of modern SpongeBob episodes end with something like this where it's like everyone turned into X thing? You know, you've got Karate Pals where everyone turns into karate fighting people, Sponge Chovy where everyone turns into anchovies, and Kiss of the Nematode, which I just talked about, has the witch go crazy and turn everyone into nematodes. Heck, there's even a Kamp Koral episode that ends just like this episode does where everyone turns into Patrick, which I know because I'm the only YouTuber and maybe the only human being who watched all of Kamp Koral, and I went through it so you don't have to. Be sure to check out my big Kamp Koral video where I covered every episode. A link in the description. Anyway, I just think it's weird that there's so many episodes that involve every character turning into something. That's got to be like a lazy writing thing, right? I don't know. Strange. Chapter 3. Exceptions. Okay, so far, this video has been one of my more typical tried and true formulas. I take a modern episode that fails at writing and compare it to a classic episode that succeeds at writing. What can I say? It's a great way to illustrate these concepts. However, for the sake of fairness, I want to acknowledge a modern episode that contradicts the main point of this video. SpongeBob Trash Pants is a season 16 episode that I mentioned in my video where I talked about the good episodes in modern SpongeBob. See, I'm not always that hard on the new episodes, guys. But I think the episode is relevant to this conversation, as it's a time where SpongeBob did feel like a character. The episode revolves around SpongeBob wanting to clean up all the trash on the beach, with the lesson being that sometimes when you try too hard to help, you end up making things worse. The episode does a good job at immediately establishing to us why SpongeBob feels this way about the beach being so dirty, with an interaction with a littering fish. The apathy of the fish, compounded by the detailed visuals of the dirty beach, all make us believe SpongeBob's motivation to try and clean up this beach. And this foundation allows us to follow SpongeBob through the narrative. And SpongeBob Trash Pants is still, at its core, a modern SpongeBob episode episode, and I don't mean that as an insult. It's just a good version of what the show is now. Yes, it's still got lots of exaggerated facial expressions, it's got much more action and slapstick, Bubble Bass and Nosferatu are there, but all in all, it's a well-executed episode in its own right. Well, except for Nosferatu. I got beef with him. While I do think there is a lot of value in critiquing modern SpongeBob by comparing it to classic SpongeBob, because classic SpongeBob followed certain basic writing principles that should be present in every story, there are elements of classic SpongeBob that just aren't how the show is made anymore. And whether or not that's good or bad is more so a matter of personal taste. Unlike the more important principles I like to impart on this channel about having meaningful characters with concrete beliefs, motivations, and flaws, which, if they're not present in a narrative, I think makes it worthy of criticism. But SpongeBob's lack of characterization is still a modern SpongeBob problem. While we can point at episodes like SpongeBob Trash Pants and go, see, he can still be a character sometimes, an episode like SpongeBob Trash Pants happens by accident, as we can see from the game controller thing and the majority of modern episodes where SpongeBob is a blank slate. There just aren't any concrete rules behind the scenes being followed about how SpongeBob should be presented as a character, and that leads to an overall weaker series, even if every so often good episodes come out of it. You can fix modern SpongeBob without just turning him back into classic SpongeBob. I mean, would that work? Of course. If they suddenly wrote and directed the show like the early seasons starting off in season 18, the show would be better off for it. But that's not the only way to move forward. If the show stayed exactly the same, but the writers just understood what it means for a character to be a character, the stories would be more meaningful, the jokes would be funnier, and the characters would be more relatable. So this brings us to Patrick. Originally, this section of the video was going to be me talking about two modern SpongeBob episodes, SpongeBob Trash Pants, and another modern episode that used Patrick well as a character. I did not find a Patrick example. Now look, I haven't seen every episode in modern SpongeBob and wasn't able to just watch all the gaps in my knowledge since I decided to make this video when these episodes aired like a week ago. So if there's a banger modern Patrick episode out there that I missed, please correct me. But from my skimming of episode descriptions and the Patrick-focused episodes I've watched, what we see in Brainless Brawn is pretty much the average Patrick experience in modern SpongeBob. There's three main reasons for this, I think. 1, Patrick isn't the main character, so fewer episodes focus on him, so just by pure numbers, SpongeBob is more likely to get a successful episode. 2, the Patrick Star Show's existence probably encourages the writers to scale back making Patrick-focused episodes due to him being the main character of a different show, which, by the way, I haven't watched enough of the Patrick Star Show to really judge, but he kind of feels like a blank slate in that show too, from what I've seen. But then again, if I'm wrong, please cite episodes for me in the comments below and I'll address them in a future video. But the biggest reason I think that Patrick ended up this way is that he's a character that is incredibly susceptible to Flanderization. Heck, he's even more susceptible than Flanders himself, and the phenomenon is named after him. The dumb character is often the character most likely to find themselves being written poorly as a show goes on longer and longer. For one, dumb characters, by their nature, just do less, so it gives the writers a lot less to work with. But also, being dumb is already such an exaggerated character trait that as new writers get hired and are given the rundown that this dude is the dumb character, they lean into that main trait, and then as new writers replace even those writers, the traits just get more and more exaggerated. I'm not bringing this up to let the writers off the hook. There's an incredibly easy solution to this problem, and it's to have some sort of an anti-Flanderization document that reminds the writers of the character traits that keep the characters well-rounded. In the case of Patrick, that would be his capacity as a friend, his overconfidence even in the face of being wrong, and his capacity to actually have an opinion from time to time. I feel like by now, any show that goes over 5 seasons should have some kind of contingency to avoid letting their characters become these blank slates that do little more than stuff that aligns with the stereotypical trait associated with them. But for some reason, they're still putting out episodes where characters just aren't characters anymore. Hey, thank you so much for watching. I'll recommend again my Kamp Koral video. It's 2 hours covering every episode. It's some of the best work I've done on this channel, or you can check out my breakdowns of those awful AI channels like SpongeTruce over on my second channel. If you like what I do and want to see me do more of it, consider becoming a channel member or subscribing to my Patreon. See you next time.